Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are joining us from around the world. This is Tipping Point Live, and I am your host, Andrew Podkowitz. We meet here weekly on Thursday afternoons, U.S. East Coast time, to chat with industry and thought leaders, really to pick their brains, learn along the way, and hopefully have some fun and some laughs as we go. We are coming to you live this week from New York City, in Fulcrum's new corporate headquarters in Manhattan. And I'm joined today by Sachin Panicker, who is the Chief AI Officer at Fulcrum Digital. Welcome, Sachin.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me on this show.
And appreciate you making time for us. I know you've had a very busy several weeks traveling all over the world, meeting with all kinds of folks and talking on the topic du jour, which is artificial intelligence and really its applications across industries, across professional and personal uses. For folks joining us out there across Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, by all means, feel free to ask questions, make comments. You can do that right in the social media platform you have joined us from, and we will get to those along the way and then have Sachin speak to those. So welcome. Now that housekeeping is out of the way, we have chatted a lot, and we've chatted a lot internally at Fulcrum about artificial intelligence, AI, Gen AI, and a lot of other vector models and databases and all sorts of things. I mentioned, a few weeks ago when we all met at the Tech Exchange in New York, I am solidly Generation X. I grew up in a world where AI was always portrayed across television, across Hollywood movies, as something to be wary and frightened of, whether it's the Terminator and Skynet taking over the world, or Stanley Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey, where HAL, the AI on ship computer, took over. It's a different world now, right? And AI means something different, and there is a kinder, gentler side, as they say, of AI, but there are also some risks there. Can you give us a little bit of your background and talk to us a little bit about how you got into this space and why it was so intriguing for you?
Thank you, Andrew. Well, I have been like you. I have been fascinated with more than scared. I have been fascinated with AI, since a long time ago, and I took to understanding AI in in its essence, in its core. How does it work, and how it can bring about a larger.
I think, Sachin, sorry to interrupt, but I think referencing AI has set off alarm bells literally in your background.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a New York traffic, right? So it keeps on. Yeah. So I have been doing a lot of research around this area, and have been fascinated with this for a long time. My background is in mathematics. I've got a very strong. I was a national maths Olympiad winner when I was a child, and then there was no looking back. Kept on working on mathematics, and that's what got me into AI. To be very specific, I know this sometimes with how it has been portrayed in a lot of cinemas, not just Hollywood, but even otherwise. There's always this doomsday scenario, and we kind of, and it's natural to be afraid of something that we cannot really put our mind around it, right? Because the technology is at a very nascent stage. Although we have done so many things with whatever has been established with ChatGPT of late, there is still so much more to go. It is still at a very nascent stage, right? But having said that, anything that the human mind is not able to comprehend, initially, we are bound to be scared of something, that we do not appreciate or understand. But having said that, there is the goods far outweigh the bad, as is the case with any technology. Even for that matter, I always quote this whenever I speak to people, is how it all started, right? The Paleolithic age, the first humans, they invented the stone tool, right? There was nothing to invent per se. You just had to sharpen the stones, right? But it was done for either hunting. Obviously, we had to feed ourselves, or because we need food to survive, right? Or they must have invented it so that they could protect themselves from all the predators out there, right? But then there's always a good side to it, there's a bad side to it, to any technology. And I think that's where the human spirit always, triumphs and conquers it all, right? We always try to, the greater common good in us, we try to use technology for the betterment of, the humanity. And especially with AI, even if all those negative, I mean, let me not say negative, there could be a lot of scenarios wherein it could be put to some nefarious use, but the good far outweighs it. It can be used for a drug discovery, cancer research, and there are so many, I mean, there are a lot of things that we can actually put a good use to it. So yeah, I'm a firm believer of, using technology for a better cause, and we have to do that. As and all the governments, all the governments, different educationists, philosophers, technologists, everyone from every walk of life need to come together and put a lot of regulation around in place, and that is what is going to happen in the future, and you will see around you. So yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely appreciate that. And when you talk about the evolution or introduction of any technology, whether it's what we would consider primitive technology, whether it's stone tools or the Iron Age and spears and weapons, I think something that remains a challenge, I think, for a lot of folks is the difference between a three-dimensional tangible thing like a stone axe, or let's say brick and mortar retail, where in this particular store there's this traffic. If you change out an end cap, it takes this many hours. You put product on it, and you're selling it, kind of thing. Already people are at times confounded by digital and tech and things like hosting and cybersecurity. And then you add this even more complex element to it, which is it's not just zeros and ones that are static. We're not talking about models that learn and things that are getting smarter as they go, which is, we're just as a society starting, I think, collectively understanding the zeros and ones piece of static websites, and now we're getting even deeper. Can you talk a little bit about, what that looks like, in part, how these models are initiated and grown, and also a little bit about, I think we all accept, and society, sort of generally speaking, sort of has this weird landmark date of Chat GPT-4 launching, and that's when AI came about, right? But it goes much deeper than that, right?
Absolutely, Andrew. So, I mean, it goes back to, I mean, if I have to trace it exactly, almost like a century ago, that, we started building systems around, and the whole concept was, why can't we try to emulate, and equip the computer systems, or the systems, machines with human like intelligence, right? And at the end of the day, that is what is artificial intelligence, right? Because we humans are capable of so much more thinking, and so what we tried to do was, machines were initially stupid, right? We had to make them do things for us, and then later on, computer software came into picture, and then we started instructing it, giving it very specific instructions on, this is how it's supposed to behave, and these are the scenarios, these are the rule-based systems, etc., right? And then that is when, so if you actually look at it, there are two elements to this, Andrew. uh, we as humans, we have never been limited by our capability to dream and to conceptualize, or innovate in our minds, right? And I'm sure even our forefathers, our ancestors, they used to dream of big things, like, going out there in outer space and doing so many more things, right? The only difference between then and now is that at that time the technology had not grown to a level, where it could make all our dreams come true. Okay. And that is where, and then if you were to speak about, you spoke about Chat GPT, so let's just talk a little bit about, how it started, almost like a century ago, or maybe like, last 50, 60 years. There have been a lot of development around it, right? So it started with rule-based systems, slowly and further, people realized during after the end of the Second World War, when it was all fought based mostly on how you can intercept enemy messages, and those days you had to hire a translator to be interpret, one language and translate from one to the other, right? And that is when, people started realizing that, government started realizing that if we can equip machines, or our systems, with that capability of translating. And that was the origin of today's chat GPT, if I have to actually put my, finger around it. And that is when, we started with a bag of words, natural language processing. That's the origin of that, right? It started with a bag of words, and then word to vec, globe, and a lot of different kind of models came into the scene. But what really made a difference was, and then slowly we started going into, BERT and all were very complex models, which were built, and which were super efficient, right? But then all that, the one thing that was a game changer was 2017, that 8-member team, Vaswani and others, which published 11-page paper, right, from Google Brain, which was attention is all you need, right? And I love the topic of that, attention. And because the whole model revolved around that, a transformer-based architecture, wherein, if you can act, because prior to that, there were recurrent neural networks and convolutional neural networks. They realized that recurrence and convolution is only going to take us so much there. But beyond that, if you really want to equip the machines with a human level kind of an understanding wherein they can process the language like the way humans do, you have to do something different. And that was the origin of the transformer architecture, without going anything into the detail of it. And that is when OpenAI picked it up, and they said, okay, that now there's there's an architecture available out there, right? So can I implement it mathematically? Can I program it? And that was the start of GPT era, GPT-1, and then leading up to GPT-4. And we all know what happened since late last year, right? We are sitting here and we're talking about large language models, which are, although they are large, but they're so far showing superhuman like abilities, And yeah, so that's that.
It's
That's where we are right now. Yeah.
it's interesting. You mentioned that humankind, the sky is the limit when it comes to imagination and dreams and what we can as humans conceive. And it always sort of amused me when people would talk. I think it was either 2020, whatever year Back to the Future predicted the future, the movie, right? And I
Right.
remember that year, there was a lot of coverage of, oh my goodness, like this movie predicted what we would have in 2020, when in fact it was conceived 30 years ago, and then it was created from that vision. So it wasn't luck, right? These were things that people had imagined, who then created them, which always sort of amused me. Um, and I'm, personally curious. I think a lot of people talk about Alan Turing being sort of the father of modern computing. And for anyone who's seen the Imagination Game, which is sort of the story of Enigma, which I think was the code breaking, that the British and the Allies used in World War II against, I forget what the German cipher machine was, but was that some level of artificial intelligence that or natural language, or that model used?
A little bit, I wouldn't call it like the exact, level of that, but then yes, it was. Obviously, Turing is the father of it all, right? We all
Yeah.
have, the very test that, we used to so far, now will have to, obviously, will come to the present day also. But so far, the Turing effect was the Turing test was the actual test to be able to, let's say, fool a system, to to find it, to detect whether it is actually interacting with, let's say, a human or a machine. And if you can do that, and then you would know for sure that your machine has that kind of an intelligence, that it cannot really, like, it has actually has the kind of human level intelligence, right? So that is how that test came up to, right? He's definitely the father of it. But then, I'm sorry, Andre, yes,
No,
sir.
no, no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. But then I would, I personally, I know, there are a lot of scientists out there who attribute, everyone's fascinated by, something or the other. And I think it is a whole, it is a sum of smaller events that contributed to a culmination that we see right now. And I think every single act and every single contribution, weighs majorly, has probably equal impact toward it. Because even with one missing piece, I don't think we would have gotten here, right? Which is where I say that stone tool, or, when we discovered fire, right? Or for instance, steam engine as well. People might say, how can steam engine be linked to this? But yes, definitely, that is what got us to the age of, let's say, the first industrial revolution got us to the age of, let's say, the telegraph machine being invented, right? So on and so forth. And what we are here. So in my I personally feel that, McCulloch and Pitts, when they came up with the first artificial neuron when they invented it, because we've been trying to simulate, the human neuron for the brain, the neuron in our brain for quite a while, right? But when they came up with that artificial neuron, I think they scripted, what we see right now as deep learning and a GPT and everything. So yeah, so that's what it is.
And if I'm not mistaken, you talked about sort of the Turing test. And I think that was sort of the underlying premise of the movie Ex Machina. I think that he brought in the character to see if his AI model, was could pass the Turing test. And then you've got, Isaac Asimov's three laws of robotics or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So all these little steps along the way that were sort of discussed before they became reality, or what today's reality is. And it's all fascinating, and certainly I could hear you talk about it all day. Can you talk a little bit about, I think at this point, most relatively tech savvy folks understand tools like ChatGPT can do things like write emails for you or help you with putting together a presentation. And there are other tools that leverage ChatGPT or other sort of open source models that can help you with creative and doing, can you talk a little bit about what's contained within those models, how they source their information and get larger and smarter, as it were, and then on the other side of the coin, what are the different models that are available, and what are the risks of the open AI type models versus whether it's homegrown or other sort of more what I think are vector models, but you could help educate us all on that.
Definitely, yes. I mean, I could go on for a few days to just, because this is such a large topic, to cover.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have to go to the depth of it, because there is so much of depth to it, but still, let me just try to probably, phrase it in a more simpler manner, and for everyone out there as well. So what really changed was, after 2017 was the advent of generative AI models. So if you actually look at it, generative AI has been there for quite some time. It's been almost like 5 decades now. Bayesian learning came in. So Bayesian learning, has been came into the picture, and a lot of people started using it. At the end of the day, what it also generates is some kind of let's say, a probability distribution. Nothing different than what you're trying to do here with data. But then, how this really changed the game was that this particular age of generative AI models that attention is all you need, and GPT specifically has brought in, is that we have been able to use an artificial neural network, which is at the core of a deep learning network, to train itself, with a mechanism called as self-attention. There are a lot of finer details to a transformer model architecture, but what really strikes out is, if you have to just sum it up in 2 sentences, self-attention, which is where it is able to weigh, the context of, let's say, one particular word in a sentence vis-a-vis all the other words in the sentence, at the same time. And this processing happens, not sequentially, but in parallel. And that is what sets it apart from, let's say, recurrent or a convolutional or a large short-term memory, LSTM network, right? And by doing that, it is able to give because at the end of the day, all it is doing is, predicting the next word in a sentence. I mean, if I have to put it like out there, this is all that it does, right? So it is generating the next word and the next word and the next word, and thereby constructing, let's say, a sentence or a paragraph, or let's say like an essay, right? So it by doing that, by using the self-attention mechanism, it is able to generate a token or a particular word, which, like, let's say, the best of the humans, or the average human also, when we are speaking right now, when I'm speaking, right? I mean, this thing is even now, so it is not scripted, right? So I mean, even let's say in a regular day scenario, right, when we are talking to each other, right, we don't practice that, right? But those things are, so the next word is coming off one after the other, and put together, it does make sense, right? And so this is exactly the ability that has been imparted to a artificial intelligence, system right now, which is nothing but at this time point in time, it's a large language model, the generative AI model, right? So this is what sets it apart. And but then the question then comes in, our brain has got these thousands and thousands and lakhs of neurons, right? But it works a little differently though. It doesn't really work like an artificial neural network that we have presently in these models, because the way it processes it, that sequential manner, I mean, in terms of the neurons connected, each layer connected to each other, our brains also have these spiking neurons. So, I mean, that's where people are now working on a biological neural network and a whole lot of, and there's so much interesting research going on. You're actually living in very interesting times, right? So having said that, so what really gives it its real power is also that it has got all these different parameters wherein it stores that information. At the end of it, if I have to put it in a very layman kind of language, right? So which is where
Right.
GPT-4, which is which started, to have 170 billion parameters. I mean, you can imagine it. 170 billion is a whole lot of parameters, right? So each of those parameters, if it has to store that information, it's as if I have to draw an analogy, it's like, let's say, a very smart human, okay, who has read through a lot of encyclopedias out there, all the different kind of books, etc., and has read everything and has become extremely smart. It is just the same. The only difference would be, even that smart human, if you ask that person a question, we have a limited RAM at this point in time, right?
Mhm.
We will not be able to recollect a whole lot of things that we have learned and read. But a machine will not really is limited by that capability, right? So which is where it becomes superhuman like smart, which is what ChatGPT Plus does. And
I would argue the difference between knowledge and intellect, but that's a different conversation for us to have. But
absolutely.
but to your point, part of this is your output is only as good as your inputs, right? And with these models, these open models, and I think we had chatted at one point about, and I forget who, and apologies if I'm misremembering, but whether it was Microsoft or someone had released an AI Twitter account. I think this was back in 2014 or 2016.
Uh-huh.
And what this AI bot did was respond to questions and comments, but based on what it gleaned from social media, from Twitter, which, as we know, you know, there's the human morality, right? And what we are individually and collectively taught, in terms of moral compasses, what's right, what's wrong, what's evil, what's not, helps define and inform what you might do or say, right? Whereas this, with this open models, how do you, outside of governments and regulations on how it's used, how do these models take into account, if I were to ask it who is good, who is evil, how does something like ChatGPT give me an answer? Because it's, I assume, learning in large part from what it's taking in, which is this massive, tome of content across all kinds of channels.
That's a very good and interesting question, Andrew. And I'm glad that you asked that question. So when ChatGPT, for instance, any large language model like ChatGPT, usually gets trained, it's not that, I mean, although it's large, it's a wider, let's say, artificial neural network, which is undergoing training with lots and lots of data. So it's, let's say, it's, gleaning through all the different kinds of text available on internet, etc., publicly available content, let's say, right? So although it is allowed a bit to run wild, and run amok and get all that data and try to figure out, make sense out of it. But then there's something called as an RLHF, which is reinforcement learning based human feedback, right? So a human in the loop, who keeps the model a little bit in, like you keep the horse in the leash, right? So the dog in the leash, yeah. So you have to obviously, any new system that is getting trained, you have to keep it, a little bit of balance and check is required, which is where the humans come into picture. So all these larger language models, and that doesn't mean just one or two human, it's a very elaborate process. So what happens is, because you have to teach them, as you rightly mentioned, there's a moral compass, right? I mean, whatever we in society consider as good and the bad, and so there are those accepted and the unaccepted, things, right? So whatever is currently accepted, I mean, whatever is in the purview of the moral compass, so the humans, they try to keep a tab and check on the, let's say, for instance, the GPT when it was getting trained,
Mhm.
so if it was veering in that direction, wherein the language tends to go in that direction, so it is checked, saying that, hey, if you use this, let's say, bad language, you get a minus. You're not rewarded for that. You're penalized for it. So that is because otherwise, it's at the end of the day, it's not a human, it's an artificial. I mean, it's a computer system, right? So
Right.
it knows that, hey, I mean, I'm being penalized. So next time I'm going to be careful. I'm not going to use this word, right? And if you use the right, nice words, your empathetic words, you're probably, rewarded, kind of things. So I mean, I'm trying to like put it in a nicer manner context
Yeah.
out here. But the whole process is very elaborate, and that's where the Meta released Llama, right? I mean, and then again, there is also this aspect. See, the thing is, if we are, uh, I mean, initially the concept was to develop something which has human level kind of capability and understanding. Now if humans intercept this whole process, right, and if you're trying to put, even through RLHF, certain checks and balances in place, it defeats the purpose of creating something like that, right?
Right.
Because then at the end of day, you are creating something, you're not trying to you're not making that system completely evolve, which is where chat gpt initially, when it came up, the gpt 3.5 and 4, you can see that initially it was kind of let loose to get trained upon all of this. That was the whole intent. And I would not say that that was wrong. It was right in a way, right? But then Meta, when they came up with Llama, they were pioneering the responsible and ethical AI, right? Which also makes sense, right? Which is where they kind of trained it on, which is where if you try to test both the models now, I'm sure GPT with the latest version also has evolved, so that it won't give you those kind of answers. But Meta specifically was trained, in that realm, wherein it would only give you the kind of, I mean, it won't veer into a direction wherein, it will probably start giving you things which is not really, humans may not like. So yeah. So there are these two, no, I mean, aspects to it, right? So RLHF is a technique for that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area to certainly for someone like you who is entrenched in this every day. There are the technical piece of it, I think, comes second nature. I think a lot of questions people have around this, and the morality and ethics around any new technological development. And I think, again, we've talked about Alfred Nobel, who invented dynamite, for mining, and then it ended up being used for warfare. Or you think about Oppenheimer and team, who created something that they thought would be a deterrent, but was ended up being used, and now nuclear is something that it could be used for evil. How do we collectively, and how do you see the future of ethics and morality and uses around things like AI? And I think you've written about in white papers and other publications, AI truism. Can you talk a little bit about what that stands for, what that means, and how that community is looking to have some kind of guardrails and protections around the uses of artificial intelligence and different AI models?
Absolutely. While I said initially that there's a lot of sirens going on in the background, right, Andrew? So yeah. So while I said initially that
Apropos of policing AI, right?
yes, exactly. It goes off at the right time,
Yeah.
so yeah. So while we are living in interesting times, we are also living in, let's say, a little bit of difficult time. Why do I say a difficult time? Is because we have invented something here, which we are still trying to fathom, and most of the humanity is still trying to grapple with that, the invention itself, right? And trying to fathom and trying to understand how it can be used, because this has been, generative AI has been something very unlike all of humanity's prior inventions, right? Because the pace at which it has grown now, and we are looking at an age of singularity wherein there will be uncontrollable explosion because of this invention, right? And we have to, now we will be playing up the catching up, we will be playing the catching up game, right? Because the technology is progressing so fast, and by the time everyone huddles and comes together and tries to put those checks and balances in place, we will always be playing the catching up game. But we will get there. Humanity is always put through a difficult test. We have always survived. We have always triumphed, right? It's just that with respect to this particular case, AI TRISM stands for AI Trust, Risk, and Security Management, right? Broadly, if you look at it, the category of a responsible and ethical AI. The word itself suggests that, how do we use AI responsibly, right? Because it can be used for good as well as evil, right? But if we can put those guardrails and those checks, as a society in place, so that it can be used for the betterment of humanity rather than bringing something. And well, while it can be used, it can also be used for the nefarious purposes, which is where the checks will come into place, right? And then there's always the ethics around it, right? How much can you do with it? You can do so much more than it, right? But where do you draw a line when it comes to using it for certain purposes, etc.? That is where ethics come in, right? And that's, I mean, I've been a big pioneer and champion of a responsible and ethical AI. And if you look at it, there are various ways of getting it done, Andrew. Like I said earlier, and you also summarized it, beyond getting all the governments and the regulatory authorities and the bodies, and people from, as I said, from other significant walks of life, right? Not just technologists, philosophers. This is the time wherein we will need everyone to come together and to make this, AI safe for everyone to use, while we do not stop the progress of it. Because by stopping, because earlier when GPT came in, I know a lot of, without quoting, there was a community which was coming together, right? Saying that, hey, can we put some checks and balance? Can we not, like, have a GPT-5, let's stop here. I mean, on one hand, you can always give the case for stopping it, but as I said, on the other hand, we still have to find, a cure for so many so many deadly diseases out there. Do we really want to stop? We don't want to stop, right? So I would rather put it to good use. If we can find a cure for cancer, right? If we can really, get ourselves in space, and there are so many other things we should, and like the global warming and stuff like that, right? So coming back, I think while everyone comes together, the key element, which is what, we are also trying to do. I mean, I've always tried to pioneer and, bring a team together, to do that, is to make AI, because AI may be humanity's, well, it could be the last thing that we ever invent if we go this route, right? Because by making something that is so super intelligent, right? And after that, then we can all be relaxed and sit back and, be lazy, and it is going to invent on its own. And we've already started seeing that glimpse in large language models. It can be an inventor. Like we humans are inventors, right? Can AI be an inventor? And if that happens, and if that is going to be our last invention, let's make sure that we, put together a very inclusive system in place. And when I say that, so far you have seen everything that, I mean, we have not built an inclusive society around us, right? Every single thing that we have invented, or when we go around, we see that, how biased we humans are. At the end of the day, since we are biased, everything that we build ends up being, more biased, right? So if we can have more of diversity, equity, and inclusion of people who are working around it and building models like, let's say, a GPT or a Llama or just AI, pure AI systems, we need to have a team which is a very inclusive team, which represents every single, different faction on this earth. And if we can make that happen and make AI inclusive, I think that will be a good starting point.
Yeah, and well said, and absolutely, it's something that everyone should support. And to your point, there is no turning back, right? There are certain things that are trends, fads, what have you. This is not one. This is here to stay. We are here on Tipping Point Live with Sachin Panicker, who is the Chief AI Officer at Fulcrum Digital. For folks joining us out there across YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn, feel free to ask any questions. You can drop them right in the social platform comments, and we can get to those. So far we've been talking about a little about the origins of AI, perceptions and or misperceptions about what AI means and how it will impact society, business, our lives, and it's driven largely by, the origin of the models, and then this sort of explosion of Chat GPT when 4 hit the market. And can you help us understand what an open model is? What are the potential risks of folks, especially businesses, leveraging something like an OpenAI Chat GPT for business use cases and inputting their own, customer data or content into that platform, and then move on to talking about sort of closed, or I guess vector models, and what the risk reward is there in those two different models?
Absolutely, sure. So if you actually look at it, the whole landscape, Andrew, ever since, I mean, mid-March, early this year, after GPT-4 came into picture, right? And then slowly and steadily, steadily, there were other models which started, flooding the market, right? And good models, while there are good models and there are not so good models as well. But then at this point in time, every morning I wake up and, I'm kind of scared to wake up these days every morning, and open my smartphone, and then pop would come like, there are like while I was asleep, there are like a dozen different models that have already come, hit the market. And I was like, what I was doing, well, no, have I been like, wasting my time? But then, so that is the rate at which, models are flooding the market. The difference. So let's start with GPT. Maybe, let's probably accept the fact that, it is at this point in time the undisputed leader in the market in terms of its capability, right? So what we call as Chat GPT Plus, Chat GPT, which is like a user interface that people by and large use to like to ask questions and get answers and do whatever various things out of it, right? But the backend, what it uses is a GPT API, right?
Okay.
It could be a GPT 3.5 Turbo API, GPT 4 API, and then there are other smaller models like text, Da Vinci models, and stuff like that, right? So the only difference here is that the Chat GPT interface, if you use, whatever data you submit to it, OpenAI is going to, I mean, and they say very clearly that, that data they could use for training and making these models more efficient, because you can't stop here, right? I mean, and how does it get efficient is it has to understand, all the chat history and, get better and better so that it can serve us better, right? That's the whole intent. So while that happens, which is where I always tell, I mean, people who are in an enterprise setup that, if there is some personally identifiable information, some data privacy, if you're dealing with some data that is private, please do not submit it, to ChatGPT, and ask questions. At the same time, enterprises or business or whoever can make use of call a GPT API directly in their applications, right?
Okay.
Then they can use that, because if they are looking for, because accuracy, and consistency and speed, etc., if these are concerns, then might as well go with a, let's say, a GPT API, right? In which case OpenAI says that, if you are calling upon an API directly through your application, right, in that case OpenAI would not use that data that you submit, for training the models, right? So that's a key difference over there that people need to understand, right? But at the same time, having said that, then there are still, I mean, there could be banks out there, banking, financial services industry, right? Insurance industry. There's so many different industries that, I mean, at the core of it, they cannot play around with the data. The data has to be secure and private, right? Even if you're calling an API, you're actually sending that data out from your network out to another network, right? A third party who's going to process that data. So even if they're not going to use it for any training purpose, they cannot send that data out. In which case, it becomes difficult. They probably could not use GPT. They should not. I mean, let me not make those statements out here. It depends from, from context to context, but it will be difficult. So what do they do in such cases? Then you have, and other options wherein there are open source models, free for commercial use, models out there. Open source models by and large you can use, for this. The only difference here is that the models which are available through these models that I just spoke about, a GPT API, 3.5 4, you will have to use an API to invoke, to call, to basically have it process your data. Whereas with the open source models, like let's say a Llama or a Falcon, Gen Z, and there are so many diamond dozen out there, right? You could either install it on-prem on one of the machines, within your enterprise, or you could deploy it on a cloud instance, right? And by doing so, then you are not sending your data outside your network. So these are the options that are open to such kind of enterprises for whom data privacy is a key element. Okay, but then
So
yeah, sorry.
just so I understand, and I think you are doing an excellent job of explaining it in layman's terms. But if I'm understanding you correctly, there are these open source models, as it were, that are publicly accessible, and the data and information that me or someone else as a user is uploading into it in order to get a report written or an email written then becomes part of their large language learning model. There are some options within, especially in OpenAI and ChatGPT, where you can leverage the API and have it not be, let's say, bidirectional, where you're pulling from their large language model, but the information that you are leveraging on your end is not being uploaded into the larger, you know,
For
uh,
training the models, yeah.
model, right? And
Correct.
then you've got some of these other models where you can literally, like it's on prem, or it's on a sort of a dedicated server, as it were,
Right.
where you're purchasing as a consumer, let's say, the model with all its data, and then you now have this locally, and it doesn't, there's no access publicly or to any other applications from that, but it's a jumping off point model for you can then use it for your own purposes, your own company, and continue to upload your own data and content and make it smarter, make it better, specific to your business.
Yes.
But you're instead of starting from zero, you're starting it at 7 or 8, and you're trying to bring it to, let's say, 10 or 11, as it were.
Exactly, exactly. And there are a couple of few key elements again, Andrew. I've tried to there are a lot of other various factors. As you delve deeper into it, you get to know, for people who want to use it, for instance, right? See, today using a GPT API and getting the results is easier for me. The API has evolved, gives accurate results, it's fast enough, etc. So I just use it, consume it, let's say, in my application. Vis-a-vis the case wherein, let's say, you are working with Llama and a Falcon, etc., right? Deploying that, it requires some work, right? And you utilize, but still, even if you count off that, there's one key thing which, majority 99% of the times, people fail to understand is that, for instance, even if you pick the best open source model out there, like the most capable, let's say, right? So, if I were to just give an example, that doesn't necessarily mean it is the most capable, but let's say I'm taking a Falcon 180 billion parameter model, which is an open source model, right? And I deploy it, and let's say I'm able to deploy it easily and then consume that and use it in my application, right? But the level of, let's say, the same question I ask to, let's say, a GPT, right? And when I say GPT, let's say an OpenAI GPT, and the same question, if I were to ask to, let's say, the Falcon in this case, the level of accuracy, the level of answer might differ, right? And that happens why? Because sometimes, when these open source models do not give the kind of intent, the results that you're expecting it to give it to you, and they're not that great, then they start comparing an apple to apple and say that, hey, ChatGPT model, the GPT model is really good. It gives me such great answers. This one is not giving to me. But what they fail to understand is that, you really can't compare it. Why? Because to this date, OpenAI has not revealed the internal architecture of GPT, what they have done, right? You never know. It's not just, there are layers of processing which happens within GPT system. When you call upon a GPT API and you get an answer, okay? Whereas in this case, all you're doing is, whether be it a Llama or a Falcon or whatever, you're just taking a foundational model just like that and utilizing it. Now, if you are not doing any other layers of processing around it, unless you are doing that, you will not get those kind of finer, better, best answers. So you just cannot compare, right? So which is what people fail to understand. They try to compare, saying, hey, Llama 2 is inferior or this superior. No, they may have done a whole lot of things more than, what a foundational model does, but that is closed to you. It is behind those doors, right? Which is where you may have want to do a similar kind of thing in your setup to make, your Llama or your Falcon more efficient and better. Yeah.
Yeah, it's uh, it's a fascinating space, and certainly one that continues to evolve and evolve quickly. I'm curious, outside of OpenAI and ChatGPT, which I would certainly say is the leading platform from an exposure and use scenario. You're also saying that from an execution perspective and an intelligence perspective, it's also the leading platform. What are some of the other platforms out there that you're seeing really making headway? As you say, on a daily basis, it feels like there's new ones hitting the market. Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of them, Andrew. If I were to pick a few, there are so many. As I said, from last time that I went online and checked, I'm sure in the last few hours, there may have like 20 more might have propped up. which might have been even, which probably are even better than the ones. But no, as ChatGPT says, right, like my cutoff date is September 2021 or October 2022.
Right.
Like,
Okay.
yeah, so my cutoff date is, let's say, September 2023. Based on that information, I think Llama, Falcon, uh, Gen Z, that's an interesting model, LLM, which came from an Indian company, and which was there on one of the as a top on the top leaderboard, on the Hugging Face platform for almost like a week. Then you got Mistral from France, and there's a new spin-off, it's Zephyr. And Microsoft's Phi, I find that incredibly good because it's just a 1.3 billion parameter model, probably the smallest one out there. Nobody talks in just single digits these days, right? It has to be a 10 or more billion parameters. So it's a 1.3 billion parameter. So these 5, 6 are very good in the large language model space. Now we have got the visual language models, right? GPT now has become, from a unimodal, it has become, a bimodal, if I have to say. Multimodal, they say, but two modes at this point in time: text and images, text and visual. It could be, let's say, image or a video, right? And then once all the other aspects start coming in, then there's a new one, which is Fuyu, right? Which is touted as a good. So everyone's talking a multimodal AI now, multimodal LLMs. No longer are we talking about just a large language model. It's a multimodal large language model. So there are more and more flooding the market, Andrew, and then there are very specific models also, like the Video Llama, which is good for just understanding of video, and it gives fantastic results. I've tried it out, and from Alibaba Group, right? And Video Llama, and then obviously Metacraft, from Meta and Google, there was an audio large language model, which could understand audio, right, and which create audio, and so on and so forth. Andrew, it's like the field is widening day by day, and it's interesting. If you go to Hugging Face, and I like Hugging Face because it is truly an AI democratizer at this place, at this point in time, wherein it brings everything together. So today, if I were to just, I mean, I supposedly know AI, but somebody who doesn't know much, right? So if they were to dabble, in this field, let's say, hey, I want to do something, and then I want to play with models. What are those models which are available to me, right? So I mean, they have made one platform wherein anything and everything is available. But then there are the cons as well. I mean, if you were to 80% of those models that are available there, they don't work. So
Well, that's actually, as we get into the home stretch here of our session, the next topic I want to address is just that, which is everyone under the sun is saying we've got AI, or we use AI, or we have an intelligent model, or we've built out a large language model, or it's the hottest topic in the market. And I know that, how does a business parse through what's real, what's not, and what's on the roadmap versus what people have today. And I know, and I think it has yet to be launched and revealed publicly, but you have spearheaded and helped architect, an enabled AI platform. I don't know if I can say the name of it live yet. I think it's going to be launched next week officially. But yeah, how do businesses go about vetting what's legitimate and what's not? In part because of one of the first things we discussed, which is, a hammer and chisel is tangible, right? You can say, oh, I'm buying an electric drill from a store. I can see it in use. What's the vetting process for a company to engage and go down the path of investing in artificial intelligence and large language models and Gen AI?
I like that analogy that you used, Andrew, about the hammer. So because it's easier if it's like a hardware tool, right? It's so very easier to vet it, right? Test it out for yourself and use it. And that's the problem with software per se. But and that was the problem. And now with AI, there is increased complexity, right? And we're looking at something which most majority of humanity is still trying to understand, and it is growing at such fast pace. And given that pace, we are trying to do the catching up game, and then how do you understand? How do various businesses and enterprise, they understand and then adopt it, right? Which is where I believe, Andrew, it will be difficult. I mean, at the risk of sounding probably a pessimist, when my advice to most of, I mean, there are a couple of advices that I give if I am talking to any of the enterprises out there, is that whenever you are, everyone's trying to be an AI first company now, right? Falcom, I'm so proud to say that, we are, truly, as a matter of fact, getting there and trying to, in the spirit of it, being an AI first company, and helping our customers also be an AI first company, right? But when you do that, don't go out there big bang, I mean, take smaller strides, right? I mean, to start small and then expand on it and grow big, because the moment you are going to go all out, get everything out in there, you're going to prepare yourself probably for a disastrous, for a disaster. It could get chaotic, start small, start with one use case, start with a smaller thing, and then work it out, and by doing that, if the results are good, you derive the confidence out of it, right? And then you grow it step by step. And while you do that, how to pick those, whether go a conventional AI route or whether go a generative AI route, because it still can, everything doesn't have to be done generative AI, right? Having said that, we try to get, I mean, I always ask people to do it, very simple. Keep it simple. You don't have to complicate things, right? So in doing so, what I'm seeing mostly, in my past so many interactions in the last so many months, I've been speaking in and out every day with so many different, people out there. I see many of them, see, while see, uh, 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 with Google and with ChatGPT and all, although they have been a biggest enabler, right? They have, when I say enabler, anyone and everyone now, humanity can access information more easily,
Mhm.
freely, right? Which is very important, and which is very empowering also, right? You cannot withhold information. It has to be available to everybody out there, right? But the bane of, these technologies is also that, a lot of wannabes, I mean, you think that, one fine day you cannot just wake up and become an expert. And it's not just about AI, right? It is true for anything. If today I have to go and try to master something, biomedical, engineering, let's say, I cannot just go on to Google and to Chat GPT and become an expert, go through some data, artifacts and read it and become. No, I cannot. Even with people who are reasonably intelligent, right? So you should go to the right people, the right person, the right experts, AI experts, and take their opinion and their advice, and not try to do it homegrown, through your IT organization. Mostly,
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of people doing that. They think, oh, I have some basic know-how in software. I can do this, make it happen. But I think that will be a recipe for disaster. I'm sorry to put it very bluntly out there, but that is what it is,
Well,
and
this is partly the whole, don't reinvent the wheel, right? If someone's already done a large part of that work, leverage that, start small. You're talking about, coming in and being the best at it and going in with a bang. And, my being a lifelong, soccer or football fan, Lionel Messi wasn't the greatest player in the world when he was born, right? He had to learn how to trap the ball, pass the ball, head the ball. He had some innate skills that made him excel very quickly, but he wasn't the top goal scorer in the world when he was 10 years old, right? He had to start small and do the fundamentals and the basics. Now that said, if I carry that analogy through, if you're a football team and then you bring Messi onto your team, it elevates your team instantly right now versus trying to do your own homegrown team, which will take you a lot longer. And obviously, if you bring in the expertise and talent from an external source that already has that skill set, that's the closest analogy I think I can
oh,
draw to.
that's the best analogy, Andrew. I mean, you're so good at it, I mean,
Oh, thank you.
I'm
You're
extremely
too
bad
kind.
at, giving out
No,
analogies.
you're too kind. So we are into the final stretch here, which is where I hit you with a lightning round of questions that are not related necessarily to the rest of the conversation. So my first of three questions is, how do you leverage AI in your own day-to-day personal and professional life?
That's
If,
good.
if at all, or do you write letters, correspondence, longhand?
I, I do. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a human. I'm also tempted to like use all the fascinating AI gadgets and tools over there. And I also succumb to my desire at times, right? I mean, why? I mean, if I can really use, like the way we use Google, right? If I can use ChatGPT or anything else, might as well use it than do it, from scratch. But then, since I know the bane of, doing such things, Andrew, I do not do it. I mean, having said that, I'm not gainsaying the fact that I don't use ChatGPT. I do use ChatGPT, but I may not use it to generate content. I may use it to ask questions, get educated, maybe.
Hmm.
Okay, but I may not use it to generate content and put it out there. There is a reason for that, and the reason why is, let's say, even if it is for writing an email, or let's say a social media post, right? And it could be any social media post, right? Or anything else which can make its way to the public internet or a private intranet. The reason why is, by doing so, I'm going to contribute to, because that becomes an AI generated content, right?
Right.
And this is not the end of ChatGPT, right? Chat, we will come up with a ChatGPT 5, GPT 5, or there will be more and more models out there. And these models are going to be trained, they should be trained on human generated content. If they are trained on the content which has been generated by them, that is the sure shot recipe for, for failure at the end of the day. Their accuracy, their precision is going to go down. So
Yeah.
we have a much better, we have we have a lot of responsibility on us to not use it and dump that no content on the internet, which is why I don't use it. But I use it to educate myself, Andrew, or
Yeah.
just do some fun stuff.
Well, it's interesting that there's the old joke about how plumbers have leaky pipes and cobblers kids have no shoes. For the past 10 years, I've worked in e-commerce. When I sign offline, I don't want to shop online. I want to go to the store. So if you're in it day to day, when you sign out or sign off, you may not want to be involved in that. But I am looking forward to the day, in some way, shape, or form, where based on my behavior, based on my online activity, based on what I'm saying and that these devices hear, um, the zeitgeist will know that I want a cheeseburger tonight, and I want it, and I want to eat around 7 o'clock, and it automatically orders it for me because it knows that's what I'm going to want this evening, and it shows up right when I get hungry. That's the dream, right? Um,
It will happen in the near future, Andrew. That's the best part of it.
and it's delivered by a self-driving and made by anyway. We'll get
Everything,
so
yeah.
the second of three questions is, what is your favorite sci-fi or AI based movie or
Oh,
TV show?
sci-fi or AI based movie. Oh, that's a difficult one to Andrew, to answer. I was always fascinated by the Terminator's, series. I mean, it was because it was way too ahead of its time, and
Yeah.
how beautiful it was made, right? And Arnold was like, was too good at it. But then, having said that, one of the movies which really kind of, I really liked, but it did not really do well in the market, was Arrival.
Oh,
Yeah, really, really
that was
aliens come to Earth.
that was Sandra Bullock. Was it the Sandra Bullock one?
I am not sure exactly, because the other day I was having a conversation, and I think may not be Sandra Bullock, but was not
Oh
really.
no, yeah, it was what's her name? Yeah,
I,
Chris-
I'm gonna.
Chastain, something Chastain. I don't know. Well, I'll look it up. I forget, but yeah, I do remember that one. That was a
I
good one.
liked the movie for its concept, but then they were. I mean, obviously, they didn't come together really well because it didn't do well on the marketers. Because aliens are coming to. I mean, and I hope that is the right movie because the name that I've given, right?
Yeah, no, it is. I think it's Matthew McConaughey. No, it's
No, it's not much.
Amy Adams. Amy
Amy
Adams.
Adams, yeah,
Yeah,
Amy
Amy
Adams. Yeah.
Adams and
So
Jeremy Renner. Yeah, there it is.
so there is a spaceship coming to, I mean, the aliens are reaching Earth, and as usual, we think that, we think they are here to attack us, invaders, conquerors, etc., right? But then, yeah,
Thanks,
Amy.
Preeti. She said Amy Adams. Thank you.
But then, we are always cynical, right? We thought maybe they're here to, like, conquer us or kill us or whatever. But then the thing was, they were trying to communicate, and over a period of time, the movie revolves around that. And at the end of it, the finale is wherein we are able to understand, decipher what they are trying to, convey to us. If I remember it I mean, it's been a long, long time. But then what they were trying to do was, they were not here to, like, they were here to save humanity.
Right.
That's such a great message. I mean, that is what, I mean, that is what I see from AI also, that, that it could probably be like, by reaching a level of artificial general intelligence, super intelligence, right? You never know what if, the machines are going to help us. I mean, it's going to probably make this world a better place, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to be, I mean, we can be skeptical about it, but you don't really have to be cynical that, it is going to be a doomsday scenario, right? So
Yes.
me, that was yeah.
Save us from ourselves, as they say, and I I'm not a huge sci-fi fan. I think the extent of my sci-fi is probably Michael Crichton and the Michael Crichton books. But Minority Report, if I remember correctly, was leveraging AI and predictive
Oh, wow.
analysis to
Yeah.
determine when or if someone would commit a crime, and then the whole police force, right, was there to
See?
avert
Yeah.
the crime that would happen in the future. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's all fascinating. And then my last question before we wrap is, on the movie front, what is your favorite movie theater food or candy to eat, if in fact you do popcorn or candy when you go to the movies?
Oh, oh, the food, right? Movie food. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So, popcorn, absolutely. And I like, salted and caramel mixed.
Okay.
If you, I mean, I don't like to have just salt. I mean, for me, it's like a big tub of popcorn, which can last me through an entire movie. And because the problem is, if I go for a sandwich or a burger or things like that, it just ends midway. And I like to keep popping stuff.
All right. So
And
I'll know for the holidays to get you one of those tri-divided tins that has one salt, one caramel, one cheddar, and one salted popcorn. That's
mix
it.
it up, mix all, because I like to get surprised every single, that I'm popping. It has to taste different.
Amazing. Sachin, thank you so much for joining us. I always enjoy our conversations, and they always go in different directions, and I always learn so much from you. So, Sachin Panicker, for anyone who this will be actually on Spotify as well next week, the streaming audio version of it. But thanks for folks who joined us out there across Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Sachin, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And it was, as always, great chatting with you.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
All right. And safe travels tomorrow.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right. Take care. We'll
Bye-bye.
see everyone next week on Tipping Point, Thursday at 4 p.m. East Coast time. Have a great rest of your day, evening, and night.